Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I can't remember the last time. I can't remember how we worked our way into the conversation the last time we were dealing with a terrorist atrocity. I think it might have been an attempt to find things upon which we could all agree. It's very, very hard to do. This one is even harder than perhaps previous ones because there are already arguments raging about whether the motivation was entirely religious or Islamist or homophobic, or the list goes on. What is the most interesting element of the story, if you are like me, and I think like everybody with a functioning brain, you are keen to see things like this happen less often? What is the most relevant question you could ask if you are keen to see things like this happen less often? On this side of the Atlantic, it's probably fair to say, isn't it, that we are utterly befuddled, baffled, even probably not enraged, just utterly befuddled about how a man believed by the FBI to have terrorist sympathies, to have Islamist terrorist sympathies, can be interviewed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation 3 times and not in any way be prevented from buying guns. There will be plenty of people who want to focus upon that word Islamist that I've just used and will want to use this story as a way with which to malign and attack billions of people, as opposed to just the one man responsible for it. And of course, the heads of the snake, if you like, in Syria and Iraq, the heads of the organization known as Islamic State. They'll be delighted with any attempts to conflate this into a problem for everybody of the Islamic faith, as opposed to just a problem for those pursuing the most warped interpretation imaginable. And then there'll be people uncomfortable with the idea of it being chalked up as a homophobic hate crime. If you told me at tea time yesterday that I'd wake up this morning to discover a prominent British journalist had to walk off Sky News last night because people were somehow objecting to his attempt to portray it as a very specific form of hate crime, I would not have believed you. I actually wouldn't have believed you, but that is the fate that befell Owen Jones last night on Sky. And I've watched it a couple of times, that clip, and I can't quite understand what the objection is to the observation that this was deliberately targeting gay people. So what question do we ask today on a show like this, where we attempt, sometimes a little probably pompously, to sidestep the obvious and the binary? What question do we ask? Do you know what I think? I think it should be illegal, in some sense, for religions of any kind to be able to preach about sexuality now. And I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, fond of that conclusion. I don't know where the mileage comes from. So many of us now live in a world that is pluralistic and diverse and tolerant and committed to equality. So many of us live in a world where crimes like this are incomprehensible, unimaginable. And yet we still live in a world where someone like Ted Cruz, the former Republican candidate, shared a platform just a month and a half ago with a Christian pastor who's called for all homosexuals to be put to death. It's by no means confined to the idiots at ISIS, but it is, I don't know, it is a disease that is utterly unaddressed by the way we converse about these things. The idea that you're allowed to tell somebody that the way they've been made sexually means that they are inferior to you, or that they're going to go to hell, or that they are deserving of your hatred, that really baffles me. That really baffles me. And I don't want to have arguments today. Maybe we'll be in the mood for arguments tomorrow. But I know there are plenty of people in this country who are homophobic. There are plenty of people in this country who use religion as a basis for their homophobia. Let's be clear from the beginning. They are 1,000,000 miles away from this man in Florida. 1,000,000 miles away. But they are on the same team. They are on the same team. In fact, you could probably make a powerful argument for explaining why Donald Trump's position is closer to that of the ISIS leadership than decent people's. Because you're either on the side of fostering, engendering, multiplying hatred, or you're against it. And if you're not against it, if you're keen to encourage more hatred, more division. Do you know what Trump wrote on his tweet? Have you seen this? Thanks for congrats. His first tweet, 50 families still grieving. Well, actually more than that, because the identities haven't fully emerged yet, and Donald Trump is taking to Twitter to boast and to preen. That's incredible. The only other people who will be boasting and preening today are the people who washed the brain of this maniac. The only other people who will be boasting and preening about this is ISIS. Do you know, I'm trying not to say anything that is even vaguely controversial, but such is the nature of this debate. I almost certainly already have. So just think about that. Donald Trump takes to Twitter to boast and preen, and he is already enjoying an endorsement for the National Rifle Association in America for his presidential bid. And I can't imagine anybody except the terrorist sympathizers boasting and preening about something like this, and yet Trump comes away within minutes and does it. It's 10 minutes after 10. What I want you to tell me is how we deal. I want to talk about the homophobic element of it today. We don't have to. If you want to come in from a different angle, of course you can. I just think we've had the conversation about gun crime. We've had the conversation about religious fundamentalism. I don't know whether this man was what they used to call going postal, or whether he truly believes he's going to end up in heaven as a result of his 50 murders, a count that's likely to rise in the course of this program. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up. I don't know. We'll never know. He's dead, thank God. But what I do know is that the club was targeted deliberately, and most religions have historically enabled and validated people's hatred of homosexuals. I see it in my own religion, historically. And it occurs to me today, they're talking about the Second Amendment not being a sacred doctrine. That, of course, is the right to bear arms. I wonder whether the other amendment, the one that addresses free speech, needs to be called into play today. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to call it into play, okay? You and me together are going to have a conversation about something I'm slightly surprised to find myself drawn to this morning, but when emotions have calmed down, when the dust has settled, maybe it will seem a ridiculous suggestion. But whether you're a bishop or an imam or a rabbi or a priest, do you think there should be laws governing homophobia? So when people say it's in the Bible or it's in the Quran, they are inferior, they do deserve to burn in hell, do you think that should actually be illegal? I can't see any alternative. The problem is, of course, that when you put a lid on these things and screw it down, we are discovering at the moment in so many areas of politics, internationally and domestically, that these hatreds don't go away. These ancient hatreds do not go away. They bubble and fester until they get an opportunity to burst out, usually through economic collapse or through the rise of a demagogue or two, and then they burst out in this bilious tidal wave of hatred and recrimination, division and deceit. And that's where we are today. We're riding a tidal wave of bilious recrimination, division, hatred and deceit. And we're all going to get drowned by it if we're not careful. Saw stories like yesterday's remind us of. So, I say again, I'm not sure what question to ask you today, but the one I'd like you to have a crack at first is this. Religion is often used as a cloak for homophobia, it's often used as a justification for homophobia, and it's often used as a rationale, a justification for homophobia. Should it actually be banned? See, we have comedy conversations in this country about gay cakes in Northern Ireland, don't we? Or sometimes about the usual suspects endorsing the idea that you should be able to turn gay people away from your bed and breakfast or your business. This is the serious side of that conversation. This is where it leads. And it begins so often with religion. Is there a case for arguing that to attack, if you like, homosexuality in any way should be a hate crime? 0345 606 0973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 13 minutes after 10 is the time. On the way later in the programme, Jacob Rees-Mogg taking your calls about Brexit. Ian Wright taking your calls about the Select Committee examining Sports Direct last week. We'll look at the situation in Marseille, and we will probably return at some point to the events in Florida yesterday. Twice as many innocents died in that nightclub early on Sunday morning as at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut 4 years ago. There was another arrest yesterday involving someone who wasn't, for the record, a Muslim, making his way towards a gay pride march in possession of explosives and all manner of weaponry. It's hatred of homosexuals that has inspired the events in Florida yesterday and, well, many crimes historically. And I think I live in a country where it's tolerated, even encouraged, by some people who are quite prominent in life, and I don't know how you tackle that. Okay, hit the numbers. I accept that the question might not be the one you wanted to talk about. If there is a different question you'd like to address, just let me know what it is, and I'll do my best to get it on the board as well. But I don't think we can have a meaningful debate about gun control in Britain, American gun control in Britain, because 95% of us think it's nuts, right? 95% of us just think, how the hell can a man who's been interviewed 3 times by the FBI be able to buy a machine gun? He interviewed over terrorist suspicion, terrorist links. He's still allowed to go out legally and buy a machine gun. I know that America will be queuing up to defend that. I just honestly think this is one of those moments where we are two countries divided by a common language. There's no earthly way I will ever be able to understand how people will today already be fighting for the right of everybody with no background checks to buy semi-automatic weapons and automatic weapons. So I don't think the gun control question is the right one. Did he do it for religious reasons? Well, he pledged his allegiance to ISIS in a phone call to the emergency services before he went into the nightclub. But equally, his father says he was really freaked out a few months ago when he saw 2 men kissing. So, of course, there'll be some sort of religious background, religious rationale in his own warped mind. But don't forget, the last man to commit a crime on the streets of this city in the name of Islamic State is now locked up at Broadmoor, not Belmarsh. Broadmoor, a mental hospital. This man appears also to be mentally ill. We'll never know. He's dead. We'll never know. Many people don't care. But what we do know is that it was a gay club. And gay clubs only exist because gay people still don't feel safe everywhere in the way that straight people do. And that's why I wonder whether the Quran, the Bible, whatever it may be, might have printed words thousands of years ago that can today be used to excuse homophobia. But if you're going to try to use those words to excuse homophobia, I wonder if you're the problem now, and you should therefore be prosecuted. And yet I'm a liberal, so that flies in the face of just about everything I'm supposed to believe. I told you it was going to be a confusing morning. It's 16 minutes after 10. 0345 6060 973. I don't mind which words you use, okay? Muslim, mad, murderous, homophobic, they're all true. They're all true on a day like today. But in terms of what a society can do to address these sort of issues and hatreds, I just want to consider the possibility that there should be more legislation surrounding religious leaders, or indeed anybody else, whipping up, enhancing, validating, encouraging homophobia. And yet I know that is about as close to the worst sort of censorship that I've ever found myself sailing. Jay's in Brighton. Jay, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, for me, whenever this sort of thing happens, it makes me think of the film We Need to Talk About Kevin. And I just think that there are conversations that absolutely need to start happening now. And even if those conversations feel really unpalatable, that we need, particularly, I mean, considering that this gunman is looking like he was an Islamist, that even though most Muslims or many Muslims would never do this, that there are Muslims out there, it's hard to put a number on it, who do take the Quran and the Hadith in a literalist sense. And I think those conversations about the literalism...
Well, it's a difficult context in which to make your point, Jay, although it's not the point you rang in to make, obviously, because we're supposed to be talking about homophobia and religion. But on a show like this, we've talked about the literal interpretations of Islam, usually plucked, of course, wholesale from EDL websites and things like that. There are 2 types of people who believe Muslims subscribe to that worldview. Terrorists and terrorist sympathizers, and then people who've read bits of the Quran on the internet and are convinced they've got a better understanding of the whole religion than anybody else has. Do you think there should be laws against? Do you think there should be laws against homophobia?
Well, that's what I'm sort of trying to say. What I'm saying is that the connection, I think, is, and again, is, I think we've got to move away from ideas of, what Majid Nawaz calls anti-Muslim bigotry. Stuff like that is abhorrent, but there is homophobia in Scripture. So I think having conversations about that and being able to dismantle it, I think, you can talk about legislation and doing stuff in law, but even though you do that, if there's like an underbelly of belief that a scripture is infallible and error-free, that is always going to run through it. So I'm not trying to divert the conversation. What I'm saying is that we have...
No, you are, because there are plenty of people...
I'm not.
Okay, forgive me then, I misunderstood you, because there are plenty of people who think that their religion justifies their homophobia. And they're not all Muslims.
No, of course not, but we're not seeing... if we were seeing... gay people being gunned down by Christians, I would equally say that we need to then start looking at literalist interpretations of the Bible. But
well, Kevin Swanson, who campaigned with Ted Cruz very recently, said Christians should go to gay weddings, hold up signs telling the newly married gay and lesbian couples that they should be put to death.
Yeah, and that...
Uganda used Christianity, didn't it, for its famous Kill the Gays bill about 20 years ago, which people like him saw as a model. So should it be illegal? Should there actually be laws governing it?
Well, I mean, that is a conversation that needs to be had as well.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to flip and have it, Jay. Obviously, you don't want to. Siobhan is in Purley. Siobhan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'm a Catholic, brought up a Catholic, and I go to church regularly. My children go to Catholic school, and do you know what? I don't care if you're gay. I don't care who you share with, as long as they're willing and consent. And if I thought that my church or my school educating my children were saying that, I'd pull them out. It's ludicrous. You can't stand behind religion and kill 50 people. It's not done through religion. I think it's done through madness. I think he's totally disturbed, and he could pull anything out and say, I've done it because of this, but it's not, and it's sickening. I'm sickened by it.
4 months he was married. He took his wife hostage, beat her up regularly. She's reported that he was mentally ill.
And he calls himself a good Muslim man to say that, to beat his wife. It's madness.
But the issue really is these are warped ideas, wherever they are sourced, wherever they come from. But there are plenty of people treated with respect in both America and Britain that endorse homophobia. And you then take a weak-willed, you call him whatever you want, I really don't mind today, and they get the idea that somehow these ideas are not toxic. They get the idea that somehow everybody's got a right to disagree. It's a lifestyle choice. That's a big thing in America, right across the Christian evangelist belt.
I think anyone promoting sort of like homophobic ideas should be taken.
As a Catholic, though, you presumably are not entirely comfortable with gay marriage.
Oh, I don't mind. No, you can call me an a la carte Catholic. I don't mind. But I know my God would not have a problem with it. I know my God. I don't care what the Bible says. I don't care that her Bible written thousands of years ago says. I know my God would not have a problem with it. I think most religions need to come into this century and sort of get with what's happening, because I think I know my religion promotes love. As long as you love each other, you treat each other kind, I don't care who you love. I really do not care.
No, and I'm no use to you sitting here, because I can't even believe we have to have these conversations. I'm just like you. I cannot actually believe politicians, priests, whoever it may be, imams, will stand up and talk about somebody else's sexuality in such an apocalyptic way. I mean, I've said before, and I'm not the first to say it, these sort of outlooks are often more to do with what's going on inside the person who holds the view than anything that's going on outside. I would put money on him being in some way repressed and terrified of his own sexuality, and that it transmogrifies into hatred. It's why so many of these evangelical Christian preachers end up getting busted for picking up rent boys and things like that. But the problem is, Siobhan, that we're not in charge. The world we live in does allow people to stand up and say and endorse very, very homophobic messages, and I don't know, maybe it's just a sort of desperate search for something that looks like a rational response. Darren is in words. Siobhan, thank you. I'm going to crack on because there's so many people trying to get involved. I do have a couple of phone lines free, though, if you want to grab one now. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Darren's in Wiltshire. Darren, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I don't think a law would have stopped that happening this weekend. I feel that it's just more censorship and bringing in a law, telling people that today, it's all right to hate homosexuals, and tomorrow, because a law's come in, they'll automatically go, oh yeah, we love you. We can't change, people like that by bringing a law in. It's through education and, understanding that. Could
it not be? It's a very cautious suggestion, this, on my part, but something has to change. The process you describe has been underway since the Enlightenment. I mean, in this country, it's probably been underway since the 1960s, 1970s. Go on.
Can I give you, sorry mate, but can I give you an example? Okay, so last week we talked about the army, and I was in the army for about 24 years, and it was only fairly recently that the army started to allow people, gay and lesbians, to legally be a part of the army. Now, in the mid-90s, right, homosexual were talked about quite derogatory, and it wasn't a thing. And, as we all know now, that gay people have served in the military for hundreds of years, and some with absolute distinction. And the thing was, all of a sudden, you seen that people were putting gay people down on this day, and then the next day in the army, gay people were allowed in. Oh, everybody was happy with it. Officers were going, yes, this is the way forward and everything. So what I'm trying to say to you is,
things do change.
They start masking their real intentions.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you don't know who the people are who are a bit, they're a bit iffy towards gay people. They're a bit iffy towards black people or Chinese people or Muslims. And at least you know who they are, mate. At least you know who they are when you've got free speech. And, people have got the freedom to do that and disagree, like they say. And I'd rather know who they are, because...
Yes, because otherwise, you however tightly you screw down the lid, at some point subsequent to the screwing down, it will blow off. It will go. Yeah. As we know, it will explode. And I guess that's where the political correctness debate begins again, using essentially the tactics of silencing people in the hope that the toxic views would go away, but they don't. They haven't.
No, they don't.
I just wonder if religion is different, because I'm a priest, I'm an imam, I can stand up and I can say the gays are going to burn in hell, and because I'm not specifying and I'm not naming names, just making a massive, broad, crass generalisation. What if you swap the word gays for the words Christians or Jews or something like that? Do you see what I mean? And in many ways, your sexuality is well, it's more part of you than your religion. You're not born into a religion. You can leave a religion. You can't change sexuality. You can't leave a sexuality behind. And yet, we've got legislation that would see you shot down in flames, quite rightly, if you stood up and called for everyone of a certain race to burn in hell, although in America things seem to be moving in that direction. Here you get shot down in flames, but you can still do it for people's sexuality. There you go. That's my point. I finally worked it out, Darren.
Okay. But I just think with the religion, though, hopefully most of us are more, educated and at one with the world and, with science and stuff these days. But, at least if these are making these religious leaders are making these sort of crass comments and disgusting comments, we can make them look silly.
Well, we can, although the old point and laugh tactic seems to have really missed its chance. Everybody insisted on getting angry and getting furious and getting hate-filled and getting divisive, when the best way to have dealt with these extremists 5-10 years ago would have been to treat them like the inadequate, pathetic human beings they are. Neil Midgley is a journalist I know quite well, and he's just tweeted to say, I don't mind Catholics telling me I'll burn in hell after death. I mind people shooting me in this earthly life, which is brilliantly put. I just can't help thinking that you're more likely, just freakish and thankfully rare though they are, the incidences of people shooting you in this earthly life are increased by the number of Catholics or Muslims or whoever it may be telling you that you'll burn in hell after death. And we haven't even mentioned the Westboro Baptist Church, have we? It's 10:30. You will understand what I'm going to return your attention to next, the events in Florida yesterday, and the question of what you do about people who still preach hatred, homophobia. I don't mind what adjective you use to describe this killer. Reference his Islamism, reference his mental health problems if you want. Whatever you're going to do is fine, but it's the people who stand up in pulpits across America and Britain and almost legitimize this sort of behavior. What are we going to do about them? Do you know what conversation we're having? It's inspired, sadly, by the events in Orlando yesterday. 50 people, a number that is likely to rise, gunned down in cold blood in a gay nightclub. I think it seems utterly inarguable that the word gay is relevant to any analysis of this story, but of course you have to accept that so is the word Islam or Muslim. The man pledged allegiance to the so-called Islamic State before going in to the nightclub, and it's that link between religion and bigotry, between religion and hatred, between, in this case, religion and homophobia, that I'm keen to explore. Oddly, flies in the face of what I was thinking in church yesterday, of all places. I was sitting in church yesterday and I was thinking, I wonder if actually part of the reason why we're tearing each other to shreds so often now is because of the decline of religion. And obviously this was before I was fully across the events in Orlando. And it's an uncomfortable thought to have arrived at, because like you, I think an awful lot of problems in the world seem to lead back to religious doctrines and religious rivalries. But in terms of traditional British Christianity, and forgive me if I'm sounding like a throwback to the 1950s, in terms of traditional British Christianity, or even, in the simplest of its forms, the love thy neighbour school of thought, it just occurred to me that perhaps the decline in religion in some way, and also the sense, unhealthy though it may be on an intellectual level, but the sense that actually your actions in this world do somehow influence what happens in a next world, even if all of your logical brain is screaming nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. The fact that used to be part of our cultural DNA in a way that it clearly isn't anymore possibly explains why there seems to be a decline in fellow feeling, a decline in humanity, a decline in compassion abroad at the moment. I don't know. That's what I was thinking in church. Your mind often wanders, but it wanders in directions usually inspired by scriptures, and I hope they were quite healthy thoughts. What we're talking about mostly this hour is when scriptures lead you in really unhealthy directions, and there can be few directions less healthy than telling people that the sexuality they were born with somehow condemns them, or discriminates against them, or renders them inferior, or consigns them to the eternal fires of damnation. And I just want to know what we can do about them. What can we do about them? 6 minutes after 11. Tremont is in Westminster. Tremont, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. How are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Wonderful. Okay, so from what you're saying, I think you're looking at it from the wrong perspective. Now, I'm looking at it as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, and I'm studying to be a pastor. Now I'm looking at it from this perspective. This is what God says. What's God's ultimate purpose for man? God's ultimate purpose for man is to save man. So God wants to be where man is, but God cannot dwell in the same place as sin. Okay? And what then is sin? Sin is
mate, I've already had one sermon this week. I was in church yesterday. Let's address the question of people who stand up in public and call down condemnation because of people's sexuality. Are you one of them?
I'm not one of them who condemn anyone for sexuality, because I'm leading to my next point.
Yeah.
A heterosexual, a man who is a heterosexual who sleeps with 50, 60 women, and a man who is a murderer, and a man who is a homosexual who is sleeping with one partner, if they do not accept Christ, if they do not accept Christ as their savior and turn from their ways,
right. So you're telling gay people to turn from their ways, then?
What I'm saying, I'm telling.
It's not a trick question.
I'm telling all people.
No, I accept you're also telling murderers to change their ways, but the gays are on the list.
I am, yes. Yes.
The gays are on the list. They need to turn from their ways.
And I'm also telling heterosexuals who are sleeping with 50, 60 women. I used to do it. By the time I was 19, I slept with so many women, I lost count.
Yeah.
Now I am studying to be a pastor, and I had to change my ways, because I realized that what Christ has done for me, He came from heaven and died for me, and He's given His life for me. So I am. So
gave His life for gays as well.
It does give His life for gays, but He gave His life for those who will change their ways.
Never said a word about homosexuality, did He? Not a single word.
Why didn't He say anything about homosexuality?
Because He didn't care.
It wasn't an issue.
He preached love. It wasn't an issue.
It wasn't an issue.
It wasn't. Whoa, okay. So it's a recent invention then, is it?
The issue was bigger. The issue was bigger. Christ came to Israel. Christ came to Israel.
See, I think the part of me thinks you're ridiculous, and part of me thinks you're dangerous, and that is why you're such a great contributor to this conversation. Because as long as you're ridiculous, I mean, you carry on with your nonsense. That's fine. But when people go out to kill others because of their sexuality, that's when people like you become dangerous.
I condemn that.
Of course you do, mate. Yeah, of course you do. While telling them to change their ways and comparing them to murderers, it's a really powerful condemnation. So where's the line, do you think, between your ridiculousness and your dangerousness?
There is no line between ridiculousness and danger.
Oh, come on! Don't be so down on yourself. There must be a point at which you realise, right? That I've stopped being ridiculous now. I've become dangerous.
James, you have lost what I'm trying to say to you.
Oh no, James, I haven't. I see it more clearly than you do, brother.
What I'm saying to you is that Jesus is coming soon, and He wants to save all men. He wants to save every single person on this planet, but He cannot do it. He cannot take man to a holy place if man is still living in sin. Because when we get to heaven, we won't...
Tremon, I understand every word you're saying. Just putting them in a slightly different order won't render them any less ridiculous.
I understand what I'm saying, James. What I'm saying is...
So what should happen to the gays that refuse to do what you've told them to do?
I cannot... I'm not the judge of that.
Well, you must have a personal view, though. What would you like to see happening to them? What do you think God's going to do to them?
My view is that all men would follow Christ. That's my view.
No, but lots of people who are gay think that they are following Christ. We're talking about you inflicting your interpretation of scriptures in which Jesus said absolutely nothing about homosexuality on people whose sexuality is different from your own. And I just want to know what do you think should happen to people? The
Bible speaks about sin, though.
Yes, but we're talking about Jesus. You told me he was coming soon. You told me he was coming soon. The Bible's already here.
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Exactly.
So that's why we're talking about Jesus and the fact that in the Bible Jesus said absolutely nothing about homosexuality. But here's the question, and again, it's not a trick question. I accept that you can't see where your ridiculous ends and your dangerousness begins. And to be fair to you, my friend, nor can I. So let's look at a different aspect of the conversation, which is here's a gay person who refuses to do what you want. What should happen to them? Either in this world or the next.
That person, a Christian should not say what should happen to someone. Because a real Christian, a genuine Christian loves all men regardless. A genuine Christian will not say this should happen to a homosexual, or this should happen to a heterosexual, or this should happen to a murderer, or this should happen to this person.
I thought you were saying that they should turn away from their sins.
What I am saying is, out of love, out of the love that we have for humanity, that Christ has for humanity, and he gave himself to die for every single human being on the planet.
Again, we've heard all this already. I mean, the question is not difficult. Here's a gay person who thinks you're a bit mad, and they're going to carry on being gay. What should happen to them?
That's between him and God.
Okay.
And you know.
I happen to know that God is cool. God is cool with all of this.
Yesterday. You went to church yesterday, right? And
yes, I did. Don't say it like an accusation.
You would have heard the sermon. I don't know, it's not an accusation. It's an accusation. But what is sin? Sin is a transgression of God's law. God's law says, thou shalt not commit adultery.
I think sin is probably, for me, I think sin... I think for me, Pastor, I think sin is probably the unnecessary infliction upon pain on innocent people. And that's what you do.
So my question to you then.
No, hang on. It's not an exchange. It's not a game of tennis.
I understand.
You are a sinner because you hurt innocent people for no reason. And you dress it up while boasting about how promiscuous you were as a 19-year-old, which frankly made you sound weird as well as unattractive. You dress it up as some sort of religious sanction. Now, I just don't know, Tremon, whether or not the law should deal with people like you or whether we should all just sit and laugh.
Well, my friend, a lot of people laughed at Christ. They spat in his face. They laughed at Jesus and they spat in his face.
Okay, so you're comparing yourself to Jesus now?
No, I'm saying...
Because that's a sin. Christ, that's actually blasphemy. Under your own religious doctrine.
I'm not saying I'm Jesus.
Whoa, you're a blasphemer and a comedian. That's quite a CV you've got there.
James, I now understand something.
Yes, so do I.
James, you're not... I get that you're playing devil's advocate, right?
I'm not, my friend.
That's not a problem.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm playing humanity's advocate.
Look at the Garden of Eden.
And you're preaching hatred.
Who was in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve?
Nobody.
God was there.
Okay. So we're going for peak creationism now, are we?
The temple in the wilderness.
Yeah.
What Shekinah came down in the temple in the wilderness?
Do you have to be CRB checked to do what you do?
Yes, you do.
Thank God for that. It's come to 11:14, and we're going to use Tremon as a wonderful springboard into the rest of this conversation. Should the law deal with people like that? People who genuinely think they should be allowed to stand up every Sunday or every Saturday or every Friday in a public building in a city like London or Orlando or New York or wherever it may be and say that being gay is like being a murderer? Because if people don't get to say stuff like that in public, maybe, just maybe, just maybe, people won't go around killing other people for being gay. I don't know. I don't know whether the impulse is born in people, the impulse to be homophobic. I very, very much doubt it. I think it gets it gets watered by men like him, doesn't it? But I sit here now listening to it, half laughing, half despairing, and fully wondering whether or not society needs to address men like that. I don't know. I started the programme suggesting that we probably do. Nothing Tremont said has dissuaded me from that position, but it remains so deeply illiberal and so censorious. I genuinely don't know. What do you think? Should the law silence hate like that? Or somehow should we keep our fingers crossed and hope that eventually everybody will be laughing? And if you know where the line is, because neither Tremont nor I could see it, between his ridiculousness and his dangerousness, I'd love you to put that into words as well. It's 11:15. Daniel writes, if the law silences opinions which we don't agree with, how can we say we live in a free, liberal, democratic society? This in response to a question about whether or not religious leaders should be allowed to preach homophobia, given that religion and homophobia seem to be the two things upon which everybody can agree played a part. In fact, we could probably add mental health issues into that mix and agree that all three issues played a part in the atrocity committed in Orlando yesterday. 50 people dead, shot dead in a gay nightclub. And Daniel raises interesting points, but what is an opinion? Can you have an opinion that is demonstrably untrue? Of course you can. Do you know, if we had a referendum a couple of 100 years ago on whether the earth was flat or round, go back far enough, everyone would have been voting to keep the world flat. The world is flat. Times change. If my opinion is that arsenic is good for you, Daniel, should I be allowed to tell your children that? Well, you know that arsenic is not good for me. Okay, well then you know that being gay is not a lifestyle choice. What should the law do? And Garthy writes, talking of Tremont, that last caller was scary and dangerous and a total nut job. All of which many people listening might agree with, but none of which necessarily means that he should be silenced by law. And that's what I'm interested in. Helen is in Loughton. Helen, what would you like to say?
Well, I think he should be silenced in law.
Really?
And the reason yes, I do, because I think that his views are so dangerous to young people, young adolescents that are at school, that are struggling with their studies and everything. They may be Christian and have strong religious beliefs. And to hear, the sort of the rubbish that he was spouting, that, they have to turn away from their sexuality. I mean, how on earth, in God's name, can a person turn away from their sexuality? It's like telling a person not to eat.
I don't know. A couple of kids and hitting your mid-40s seems to work pretty well, Helen.
But I mean, seriously, views like that, can cause young people to commit suicide.
Or they can cause young people to go out and commit murder. I don't think that's a controversial observation, albeit that thankfully it happens so rarely. And in the case that we're discussing, it was categorically not Christianity as a cloak for homophobia, but Islamic encouragement of homophobia that seems to have motivated this guy. But what would the law look like? What would you not be? Which bit would he not be allowed to say to what he just said to me on the radio?
Well, he'd not be allowed to sort of say that people, must turn away from their
sexuality. You can't. That is not, and that's the point, isn't it? It's why sometimes these people walk these tightropes so effectively between what is actually legislated for and what isn't. You need to turn away from sin, and you think homosexuality is a sin. You can't make that illegal, can you?
Well, I think you should, because I think if you get young people taking their own lives, because, these young people might be Christians, might be heavily involved in the church, and they're young people with sexual needs, and they can't be themselves, they can't express themselves and be the people that they want to be because they feel that they're sinners. I mean, that could lead to serious mental health concerns, in young people.
Oh, I know.
It could also lead to them killing themselves, because, I mean, these views are so outdated.
Except they're not outdated. They're incredibly current, and they are by no means confined to any one faith or another. I'm not going to argue with anything you've said. It's just the plausibility, let alone the desirability, of making it illegal to say you need to turn away from sin, and then someone else's right to describe as a sin something that you are utterly convinced is not a sin. and that's why it's such a difficult conversation to have, albeit that many of you are keen to join it, which means I need to give you a quick heads up. So I want to get at least a couple of phone lines free now. Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Conservative MP and prominent Leave campaigner, EU referendum Leave campaigner, will be joining me in about 10 minutes' time. And I want you to do, I wanted to get my teeth into Ian Wright, if you pardon the expression, personally, because I found those select committees last week so interesting. But I want you to do most of the questioning with Jacob Rees-Mogg. If you've got questions that you think a man who seems very clubbable, very affable, and possessed of quite an analytical mind, and he's firmly allied on the Leave side of the referendum campaign. So if you've got anything you want to put to him, any question you'd like to ask him, you'll get your chance in about 10 minutes' time. But you can book your place now on the switchboard, okay? 0345 6060 973. We are actually struggling now. It's not something I should ever complain about, but too many calls. But I am absolutely freeing up some phone lines specifically for questions to be put to Jacob Rees-Mogg in about 10 minutes' time, okay? Let's get back to the conversation we're having. Eric is in New Malden. Eric, what would you like to say?
Hi. It's actually in the U.S. there's a couple of states where it is illegal, at least partly or wholly.
So to preach against homosexuality?
Yeah, Michigan, it's illegal to preach against homosexuality.
I didn't know that.
In Kentucky, it's fine, but if you're counseling juvenile criminals, many pastors will go out and hold these courses with what we call juvies in the States, juvenile criminals. And they're not allowed to talk about homosexuality in a negative way to them because they figure if you're in a church and you're saying it to a bunch of people who think that anyway, it's fine, but don't go outside of those doors.
It's quite nuanced. I mean, but it makes sense. Does it work? Has it made any appreciable difference to attitude?
Well, I would suggest that recent events would
suggest not.
Suggest possibly not. I mean, because they're going to say it in the quiet corridors anyway. If you have that kind of.
This is the question of our times, isn't it? Does stopping people from saying stuff in public diminish over years, dilute over years the number of people holding those views in private? I don't know what the answer is to that, Eric.
Well, the tough thing in this instance, if we're using the latest event to spark this conversation,
of course,
is that if you're saying that he's a terrorist, then by clamping down on freedom of speech, could you argue that terrorism wins? Now, obviously, you know what I'm saying. It's the same thing about gun control. I don't want to take you off track, but if they use this as a way to curb guns, then people will say, okay, so you're taking away one of our rights, so they've won. So it's
well then the answer to that is don't just use this atrocity, use the 378 other ones that have already occurred in America this year as well. Use Sandy Hook, don't just use Orlando. So sure. I think I can cope with that objection, but the other one with regards to terrorism somehow achieving a silencing of bigots, it's hard to see who the winners are.
Yeah, so you've picked a tough stick to chew.
Well, we always do, and it's thanks to people like you, Eric, that I managed to forgive the figure of speech, you started it. I managed to get so much chewing done. And Tremont was great as well, albeit not necessarily in the way he intended when he rang in, because for somebody to say, unapologetically and publicly, whether on the radio or in the pulpit on Sunday, that being gay is like being a murderer and you must turn away from your sin, to a warped or to an impressionable or to a weak mind, that could create all sorts of problems. Helen was worried that it could create suicidal tendencies, suicidal thoughts in the mind of someone who is pretty clear on what their own sexuality is and is getting told every Sunday that it's sinful. And it might create murderous thoughts in the mind of somebody whose fragility is of a different flavour. 27 minutes after 11. Ruben is in Stratford. Ruben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time caller to your program. James, we are very tolerant in this country. And, I'm heterosexual myself, but my job takes me to encounter with people that are gay. Now, the thing is, I've got no objection to two men walking down the street holding hands. That shows love. Okay? What I object to is two men or two women or a man and a woman in public with their tongues down each other's throat. So it's got nothing to do with their sexuality. And, you know, your last caller, although he said a few things that, you know, he really, Jesus' teaching.
So you don't like seeing people kissing?
No, James, you don't see the point I'm trying to make here. Well, the point I'm trying to make here, if you give somebody a peck on the cheek or a peck on the lips, that's fine. That shows love.
Yeah, you don't like people French kissing in public?
Well, okay, James, do you think, okay, the girls you see that are drunk with, you know, and falling over the place and spewing over the place, do you think that's fine?
What's that got to do with French kissing?
I'm talking about it's having respect for each other, having respect for people around you.
Why don't you have respect for people who like to kiss each other?
James, this is what we try to teach our children. It doesn't matter if you're gay, bisexual or what. You should have respect.
You shouldn't kiss each other in public.
No, I'm not saying that, James.
Down with kissing.
I'm not saying that at all. Now, in terms of the guy that did the shooting, that is totally out of order. And the thing is, this guy was ill.
Well, he was like you. He hated people kissing in public as well.
Mentally ill, and that sparked him off to do what he did.
Okay. How's that worked out for you?
Well, James,
I have no idea why you've wronged me. You don't like kissing.
You know what I'm saying.
I have no idea what you're saying, Ruben.
You teach your children to be polite in public and respectable. Okay? It doesn't matter what their sexuality is.
Yes, but there's nothing impolite or unrespectable about French kissing. Hey, there's a time and a place for everything. I probably wouldn't do it on live television in the middle of a paper review, but I certainly make no apology for doing it in a club with my wife or similar. What a bizarre call. But I guess that is nature of the beast on a day like today.